And welcome to Rock, Paper, Swords, the historical action and adventure podcast. My name is Matthew Harffy.
And my name is Justin Hill.
And how are you doing, Justin?
Very good.
Good. How's the writing going?
It is going along well. I'm editing the first draft of a novel, and it was an ambitious storyline I plotted. And I'm rejigging some of the scenes in a way that I'd never thought of before, but I think is actually going to make sense. Because I think I had a break over Christmas, and when you come to a novel kind of fresh after a few weeks away, you see it more like a reader than you do as the writer. So thinking about how someone's going to come to this novel, reading it, I think, oh, this is actually the way this story can work.
Yeah, I think
It's all a
that's
bit abstract, but
no, it's an interesting thing, and I think in an ideal world, we would all have that time to put our books away for 3 months or whatever, and then take them out
yeah,
and then read them. Obviously, the reality of deadlines makes that impossible for most people, I guess. In my case, though, I do tend to I write a chapter, a very rough draft of a chapter. I will go back to it the next day and clean it up. And then I don't go back to that chapter until I finish the whole book. I don't go back to read the whole book until I finish, the first draft. And then I sort of clean up little bits and pieces that I know there are gaps. And then I'll do the full read through. And that moment of the full read through, it means some of the chapters I haven't read for months, literally 2 or 3 months.
yeah,
So I do get that feeling. And then as I get closer towards the end, of course, it's only been a few days or a week or so since I read them. So I sort of get clearer on where it's going. But
yeah.
um, but yeah, I think it really works. That's my favorite moment. Actually, is my favorite moment is finishing the first draft, of which I'm still a long way away, because it feels like, oh my goodness, I've actually written a book. The second best moment is that read through moment when you're reading almost like a reader, and you're able to say, actually, it's okay. I
Hmm.
don't hate it.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I generally can't stand my book after the end of the first draft because it's so far from where I want it to be. Um,
That's because you're precious. You see, you
Artistic.
we've ascertained that you are actually very artistic and
Yeah,
slightly pretentious.
yeah. My arty soul.
you're yes,
So the first page for me is very exciting. When I know I've got like a good first line and the first page comes out, then I'm like, wow, this is so exciting. Because I think I'm inspired by the sense of possibility. Like, it could be, this could be go anywhere, or this could be brilliant. And then by the time I finish them, they're always a disappointment to me. Um,
that's interesting because it is quite
mm,
different from the way I feel when I'm writing. I start writing and it's very, very like pulling teeth. I'm struggling with that. Oh my goodness, what am I trying to tell here? How am I trying to set the scene? I need to mention this, I need to mention that, and the reader doesn't understand why I'm talking about this. How much information do I need to give? All of these kind of things. And I think part of that is from my background as a technical writer. And so I'm writing very much, I'm always writing from the reader's perspective. I'm always writing thinking someone's going to read this. So I'm always thinking, does the reader have enough information to understand this? Do they have too much information? Am I over egging it? And so all of that. But as I get into the story more and I've done all that sort of groundwork, I sort of start hitting the ground and then start thinking, okay, we know all the characters, we know where it's going. Maybe later on, I need to rework certain bits and add a bit more depth to some of them, or take some out or whatever. But it feels now it's sort of moving, and by the end of it, if it's all going well, those last sort of maybe 40,000 words, they're almost writing themselves. It's sort of
wow.
like, okay, we know where it's going, and it's trundling along towards the
Yeah.
end. But that first half, and then when I go back and read it, normally it's the first 4 or 5 chapters that require the most edits, both for me first, and then the editor will say to me, drop this, add this, I need more, and it's usually the beginning that needs more work.
That's interesting. Yeah. So we work quite differently. I kind of start a novel, get as far as I can before I think, oh, I need to change this bit, go back to the beginning and kind of go a bit
Yeah,
further, go back to the beginning.
yeah,
So
I don't do that iterative thing, and maybe I should, but I think for me it would just tire me out, and I think I'd get bored of the novel.
well, it clearly works for you.
Yeah, well.
You know, there's many ways to skin a cat.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have considered doing that. I've done it a couple of times because of like a big gap, like over Christmas, like you say. Once I had a few weeks gap, and I really felt like I didn't know where the story was. I can't remember which novel that was, but I had to go back and sort of reread the first, 40,000 words or something,
Yeah.
and it worked. You just pick it up then, and it's all right. But the temptation always feels then to sort of spend a lot of time editing and cleaning and polishing, and I feel like I lose momentum. Because the other thing I
Yeah.
like to do is, because I only do it once, and I try to sort of I always write chronologically. I mean, I don't ever jump around. I mean, some people do write, the ending first, or they write like important scenes and then flesh out the gaps. I don't knowingly do that. Sometimes I have to go back and write scenes that were not there, but I don't intentionally do that. But I think one of the reasons I like to do it like that is because I feel like if I'm getting bored with the writing, then I think, well, there's a good chance that a reader's going to get bored, even though it's taken
Yeah.
me 2 days to write it, and it's only going to take the reader half an hour or 20 minutes or whatever to read that section. If it's slow, if I'm feeling, oh God, this is a bit of a slog to write this, there's a good chance the reader is too. So I quickly sort of get to the end of that chapter or whatever and push on to the next thing.
I think you're so right with that. I think the writer, because often we're telling stories that we want to read because no one else has written it. And if you're not excited to sit down and find out what happens, then the reader's never going to be.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So,
how is your epic coming along? Your
well, yeah, it's all right. I'm up to like 43,000 words, I think, as of
okay.
today of the first draft. So yeah, moving on. That's
So
probably,
you're approaching the second half then, where
yeah.
things start to
I'm
pick up.
approaching. Yeah, I feel like I'm sort of clicking into gear. It's a bit of a weird
Mm,
one because I feel like I feel like, you talk about the inciting incident in a
mm,
story, and I feel like I'm at the inciting incident, but there already is an inciting incident in the first sort of chapter, almost, or the
yeah.
second chapter. So I feel like there's almost like another. It's like I don't know. It's a weird one. Structurally, I don't know how that works, but I feel like I've sort of hit another gear. It's almost as if the inciting incident and the sort of the scene setting is building the story, and I've got to another moment of like another. It's like a revelation. Something has happened, that the character has discovered something, and it's sort of kicked it into another gear.
I think that's
Um,
that's quite a good sort of three act structure, isn't it? Where you have Act One, and then at the end of Act One,
So maybe this
something
is
kind
maybe I'm
of
yeah, maybe I'm sort of at the end of Act One, beginning of Act Two. Maybe
yeah,
that's where I'm at the moment then, which would make sense because
yeah.
I'm sort of thinking it'll be about 120,000 words or something. So it's probably a third of the way through, and it's probably kicking into another act.
It's kind of the moment,
Yes.
Gandalf and Boromir die, end of Fellowship of the Ring, and then you're like, okay, and they split up. So then you got kind of, the story develops differently.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Yes, that's one of my favorite scenes. It made me cry. Thinking of
Yeah,
Boromir dying. What a scene.
poor Boromir.
What a scene. I love that scene in the cartoon.
Yeah,
The
we have to talk about the cartoon because I know we're both fans of the Lord of the Rings
Yeah,
cartoon.
I loved that. I think we should contact Ralph Bakshi and see if we can get him on the show,
Yeah,
because
that's a great
he's on
idea.
Facebook, and
And he's flogging off the
he's
stills
flogging
from the
his cells,
on
isn't it? From
eBay.
the yeah. So he might ask for a huge fee to come on the podcast, but maybe not. Maybe we could just see if
We
he
could,
come on, have a chat.
yeah,
We could try to draw him out about how annoyed he is at Peter Jackson being so famous and him not getting
because I
all
thought it was
the.
brilliant.
I thought it was brilliant too, but I loved it. I was going to say I loved that scene, but I also loved Sean Bean's Boromir death scene as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
absolutely amazing. I mean, it just goes to show what a great scene it is, how well written, what a brilliant
yeah.
scene it is.
And I was thinking what a good storyteller Tolkien was. The
Mm,
kind of choices he makes, they're really kind of subtle, and they're really well thought through. And for a guy, this was only his second novel, writing, his magnus opus 3 volume. He doesn't, he has some really kind of good moments, and they're sophisticated as well. The hobbits go missing. Which hobbits have gone missing? Where have they gone? Who are we going to follow? Some really great stuff.
yeah, it's brilliant. So yeah, I mean, it's 3 books or 6 books, because
Yeah,
that's point of contention. Was Didn't he want to release it as six, or did he want to release it as one single book? I can't
one
remember now. But
single book, I
isn't it
think.
broken into 6 novels though?
Well,
It's,
6 books within the
yeah,
novel.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. But I thought each book was, I don't know, it wasn't anyway. I
It's a
suppose it's
long
like,
time since I read it, actually.
yeah, I haven't read it for a long time either.
I
Maybe,
might fix that 2026. It's the year of things going to happen.
It's the rereading the Lord of the Rings. I
Yeah,
think I'll go back to it and reread it when I'm starting my next early medieval book because
yeah,
it has that right feel for it, doesn't it?
yeah. Lots
Really,
of good words for.
great words and earthy sort of sense of depth and reality.
Yeah.
But moving on from
Talking of
that,
early medieval.
talking of early medieval, we've got our guest waiting in the wings. So, shall I bring her in?
Brilliant. Yeah, let's bring her in. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Sharon Bennett Connolly, a British historian and author. Sharon is the creator of the popular history blog History, The Interesting Bits, where she shares engaging stories from the medieval era and beyond, and she regularly gives talks on women's history. She's also a fellow of the Royal Historical Society, recognised for her contribution to historical scholarship. Sharon's new book, Princesses of the Early Middle Ages, Royal Daughters of the Conquest, explores the lives and agency of royal daughters from the Norman Conquest to the early Plantagenet period. Girls and women whose marriages, alliances, and choices helped shape medieval politics and diplomacy, even when they were expected merely to be pawns in the Game of Thrones. Sharon also co-hosts the podcast A Slice of Medieval, where she and co-host Derek Burks welcome guests from across the world of medieval history to explore fascinating people, events, and themes. Sharon, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you on, Sharon. Nice to see you.
Thank you. You too, Matthew.
So, the new book,
Yes.
Princesses of the Early Middle Ages. So, focusing on royal daughters from the Norman Conquest onwards. What made you want to write about these women in particular?
Well, originally it was princesses of the whole Middle Ages, from the Conquest to the Wars of the Roses. But apparently it just got too long. It was 143,000 words. And when I sent it into my editor, she was like, oh. So we ended up having to split it into two. So
Oh,
there's
fantastic.
Princesses of the Early Middle Ages comes out
Yeah.
on March 30th, and then Princesses of the Later Middle Ages comes out in the summer.
So, when you say split into two, does that mean you get paid twice?
Yes.
Wow, perfect. I'm going to
Actually.
start
That's a
writing
great move.
big, long books. I'll see if they'll split them into two.
Yeah, I got another advance. It was like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. That was really, yeah,
And
another contract, another advance.
is there a big difference between the two groups? Now you've been kind of forced to split them into two. Do you see differences between them, or is it really the women struggling with the same challenges and coming up with similar solutions?
It's the same challenges and yet different challenges, because the
Mm,
ones in the Norman Conquest, it's funny actually. I think there were only two of William the Conqueror's daughters who actually married. Out of five daughters, the others joined the church.
mm,
Um, Mainly, one was destined for the church always, and the other two, one had a number of failed betrothals, and either and decided to get off the merry-go-round, I think, and just went, you know
yeah.
what, stuff it, I'm joining the church. Um, but then again, Edward the Fourth's daughters, uh, one of those joined the church, and they didn't get the international marriages that other royal daughters got because of the situation with Richard III seizing the throne. So I think, yes, they're the same in a way, but each girl has a different nuance to her life. And of course, the challenges, before the rise of the Plantagenets, there wasn't that Black Death thing. The 14th century,
Mm,
things changed, and you can see how lives changed and travel changed. I think the thing that got me is that throughout the medieval period, the whole plan of all the kings was to surround France.
mm.
They didn't no English princess until Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's sister, married a prince or king of France. But they married into Spain, they married into the Holy Roman Empire, Burgundy, Norway, Denmark, and they married French dukes and counts.
Yeah.
but not actually into the kingdom of France. And when you look at it, it's like, oh yeah, they just wanted to surround France
Yeah. A
to
good idea, I
contain
think.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so there's a perception that, and I suppose to some extent it's possibly true, that women, these princesses and women in general, I suppose, lacked the agency that women would expect to have, modern day. But do you notice, just talking about this split of, the early medieval period within the later medieval period, do you think the women gained more agency over time in general, or less? Or
I
was
think
it no difference?
they always had agency in that it's not like, with us now, you go to school, 16, they start asking you what you want to do with your life. By 18, you've got to have your career planned out for the rest of your life. And then by 21, you realize, actually, I can do what I want, and careers are not, this is me for the next 50 years. With royal daughters from the cradle, they were, their lives were planned out for them. But, and it was, you're going to marry, but the chap you've just been betrothed to when you're 2, it might not be him. But it's not, your life isn't your marriage. Your life is your value to England. Your husband, they are the prime ambassadors for their fathers and brothers. It was, being a princess was a career. It's
Mm.
just they didn't have a choice in it. This was going to be their career. So you had Joanna, Henry II's daughter, going down to Sicily. You had Henry III's sister marrying the Holy Roman Emperor. And you had Matilda, Henry I's only legitimate daughter, marrying the Holy Roman Emperor and becoming an empress. And she was a regent. She was ambassador for her father. And the reason Henry I thought he could make her Queen of England was she was well trained for it. These women were not just pretty girls on the arm of a king. They had a job to do. They were the link between their homeland and their husband's land. They were the family connection. And of course, family connections are a lot harder to break than just political alliances. So they were there
Mm.
to make sure that this connection lasted for decades.
Yeah.
This book spans the history from the conquest and the last Anglo-Saxon princesses to King John's daughters.
Yes.
And I wonder, there must be an incredible change in the status of women, because even the status of marriage kind of changes during this period, because Edith Swanneck, she's kind of handfasted, I believe. So even the kind of concept of monogamy is not really established in the kind of, in 1066. How did these norms change, and how quickly did they change?
Well, it's funny you mentioned Edith Swanneck. The book starts with Edith's daughters,
Mm.
Gunhild and Githa. And you look at those two girls, their lives are totally different. One is first found in a convent during the Norman Conquest and then basically runs off with a Breton lord who may have actually kidnapped her because of her mother's lands. He'd been given her mother's lands.
Mm.
And it seems he probably kidnapped her from the convent to help him control her mother's lands. And the other one went the furthest of any princess because she actually married Vladimir of Kiev.
And doesn't she end up as a saint in the Orthodox Church?
Yeah, and she and her son was I can't pronounce it, Mstislav. Um, is one of the great heroes of Kiev.
Yeah.
So you've got these two who are just totally different fates. And but all the way through you see each girl, like I say, they have, when you look at John's daughters, you have the eldest was married to the King of Scots and in a very unhappy marriage, but she found a purpose and in her duty to England And her private letters are used as the communications between England and Scotland when relationships are strained. John's illegitimate daughter, Joan, who became Lady of Wales and was the wife of Llewellyn IV, she is another one who her connection to England is the reason Llewellyn married her. But she uses it so wisely. You know, she warns King John at one stage that there's a plot against him because Llewellyn's actually talking to the rebels. And she hears it from Llewellyn, so she warns John, and so he changes his plans and survives.
And what were the daughters of King John like? Did they take after their father? Were they kind of I mean, he's classically one of the worst kings of England.
The children of King John are ever so close together. You know, as even though Joan, the eldest, was raised mainly in France, when she comes back to England, she's very close to her brothers, Henry and Richard. And the one who's least close, I suppose, is Isabella, because she marries the Holy Roman Emperor. But then when her brother, Richard, goes on crusade, he stops off to spend a week with her before he goes off to fight. And the same with her younger sister, Eleanor, is married to Simon de Montfort. And they, again, stop off on Simon's way to crusade. He actually leaves Eleanor in Italy. It doesn't say that she's staying with her sister. There's no record of that. But you can't help but think that they probably did, you know, spend a few weeks together there. And I think that's the other thing with English princesses. You get the idea, you know, there's that saying, my daughter wanted me to treat her like a princess. So I married her off in exchange for a treaty with Poland, and you know, and the idea is they never see each other again. It's not. I found it wasn't exactly the case. Communication, you know, the girls weren't sent off and forgotten about. The whole idea of them marrying a king in a foreign land was to keep that connection. So they were visited. If they weren't visited, there were letters constantly and gifts between from either side. It's just they are fascinating. You don't get a great deal of information about each of them. You have to read between the lines a lot.
As I said, this brings me on to a question I think is really interesting, because in this period we know we've all three written about the kind of early medieval period and sometimes the lack of sources or having to, you know, intuit things from, you know, the gaps in sources. And with princesses, there's probably even less material written about them. So how did you, as a historian, go about trying to kind of investigate their lives and to flesh them out?
Well, it was literally going through all the chronicles. Luckily, most of them are on archive.org, which is ever so useful. But there are some letters. I mean, with King John's daughter Eleanor, who was married to Simon de Montfort, there's some brilliant letters on. The website is called Epistolae, and it's the letters of medieval women in Latin. And it's letters to them and from them. And with Eleanor, there's letters from a chap named Adam Marsh, who was her confessor, an advisor, and he tells her off for being too capricious and too fond of jewels and spending money and things like that. So there's quite an insight into what women princesses like to spend their money on and things, because you don't usually get that. So it's quite enjoyable to read those. And the problem is making sure that you don't put too many of the letters in, because you just want to put every single letter in and say, oh look, she was naughty, she spent too much money, and you know, she was just like we are these days. So it was interesting that. But there's also letters where, you know, the princesses are told, talk to your husband. I remember this is William the Conqueror and his wife Matilda of Flanders. She gets a letter from the Pope telling her to keep her husband on the right side of the church and things like that. You know, it's up to the women to make sure the men go to church and look after the church and basically give the church money. So it's interesting to see how there is a role for girls and ladies and women that men actually give them, which is to patronage of the church. That is their realm. They are the ones who finance nunneries, look after, give churchmen their living, and patronize them. And men are supposed to go to war. Women are the ones, they're the intercessors, the ones who look after their husbands' souls and things like that, because you guys can't look after them yourselves.
So are there any of these princesses that come across as having such strong characters that they were almost, or that they were stronger characters than the husbands, and that they took over from their husbands in some way?
Other than Empress Matilda, probably not too many of them. I mean, Empress Matilda is a good one because she gets a whole chapter to herself in the book. But she actually is the one who, she's fighting for England, and her husband Geoffrey just wants Normandy. And it's funny because the whole idea of King Stephen taking the throne was because the English didn't want Geoffrey as king, and Geoffrey had no intention of or desire of being king anyway. He just wanted Normandy, which he got. So, but there are others like I'm just trying to think now. Some of Henry I's illegitimate daughters. There's one, the great one that I think most people probably know something about, is Julianne of Fontevraud. And she famously went to war against her dad. She tried to kill him. She tried to shoot him with a crossbow.
Wow.
This is very Game of Thrones. I was thinking of Game of Thrones actually. In one of the things I thought George R. R. Martin did really well is to flesh out the women characters and give them and make them kind of come alive in the way that you're talking about. These were kind of literate, well-educated, kind of diplomats, in a sense. And they had agency and probably a lot more, or power in a way that's away from kind of the sword and martial aspects. And the fact, Empress Matilda becomes, rules England is quite an extraordinary fact, the kind of early Middle Ages.
Yes, definitely. When you think it was like, what? Well, 1141, she was Lady of the English. So, which was 400 years nearly. No, over 400 years before,
Elizabeth.
Mary I and Elizabeth.
Of course, yeah.
So it was remarkable that she had achieved that much. It's unfortunate she couldn't hold on to it. But there was all that attitude that Stephen had been crowned and anointed. And once you've done that, you can't undo it.
Yeah.
So while Stephen was still around, there was nothing she could do much anyway. And of course, she realized that they weren't going to accept a woman. So eventually she changed the focus so that Henry, her son, was the one who was leading the battle. But Henry II knew exactly where his throne came from. He called himself Henry Fitz-Empress. He at least acknowledged how powerful and influential his mother's right to the throne was.
Yeah.
So if you had to challenge one deeply entrenched popular myth about medieval princesses after writing this book, which one would it be and why?
I think it would be that the idea that they were just unloved by their parents. There's this attitude that kings didn't want daughters, and they were just quite happy to send them off to foreign lands at the age of 8, and they didn't think anything more of it. They weren't, but they took a lot of care of how these girls were raised. When they did send them off to foreign lands, they made sure that they sent them with people who knew them, who could look after their interests. And they kept the communication throughout their lives, it wasn't they were sent off and never seen again. It was that they were looked after, they were thought of, they were sent gifts. I mean, you have, I think, Henry II's three daughters, Matilda, Eleanor, and Joanna, are prime examples. They were sent off. Matilda was sent into Germany, Eleanor was sent to Spain, and Joanna was sent to Sicily. They all came, except for Eleanor. Joanna and Matilda came home, and Eleanor was visited by her mum in Spain. So the communication was there, the links were there, but people have this idea that, oh no, they were sent off and forgotten about. I mean, Matilda's story is a prime example. She marries Henry the Lion in Saxony, and he has a spat with the Holy Roman Emperor and gets exiled. And where does he go? He comes to the Plantagenet court. He brings his wife home to Henry II, and they have some of their children are born in England. And then when they're finally allowed to go home, they actually leave a couple of the kids here to be raised by Henry II because they think, they had something like 5 or 6 children. So they were like, well, if we leave 2 here, their prospects are going to be with the English court. And they're going to be raised with their grandfather. And they're going to be this link for the siblings between Germany and England. So it's all about this network of connections and family connections and everybody having somewhere and people to talk, communication with. Because I mean, like Geoffrey of Anjou's father was King of Jerusalem. So even Richard the Lionheart is going all the way to Acre, to the Holy Land. He's got family en route all the way there.
Yeah, I mean, the Anglo-Saxons, of course, called the royal daughters peace weavers, is one of the terms that they used. And it seems like they were weaving really this web of familial contacts across the known world, which I'd never really considered that the thing of the distances and the fact that people were traveling, we're talking 1,000 years ago or 900 years ago, whatever, people traveling to Spain and Sicily and all quite relatively regularly, people traveling long distances, which nowadays we take for granted, obviously, but at the time it was a lot of.
Yeah, I think it's a remarkable feat. Yeah, I mean, you read about Joanna's journey to Sicily when she became Queen of Sicily. She left her mother in England. Her mum said goodbye to her on the quay. She went over to Normandy, where she was met by her brother Henry, who escorted her through Normandy to Aquitaine, where she was met by her brother Richard, who escorted her down to the southern coast of the Mediterranean so that she could board ship. And all the time she was accompanied by her illegitimate half-uncle, Hamlin Plantagenet. So, it was a family mission to get her to Sicily. And the people accompanying her were ordered not to come home until they'd seen her safely married.
That sounds like a great novel in itself there. You can imagine some sort of intrigue on the way.
And I guess this continues almost up to the modern age. I mean, thinking of the funeral of Queen Victoria, kind of there's, the Kaisers there, the Habsburgs are there, almost every king and queen in Europe is there.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary to think that the descendants of Harold Godwinson are living in Kiev or living in Ukraine, not in England.
Yeah, it is. And the thing is, you can count on one hand the number of marriages, not necessarily that failed, but that didn't work diplomatically. And the only one that springs to mind is Edward III's sister, Joan of the Tower, who was married to David II of Scotland at a very early age. They were only 5 or 6 years old, the pair of them. And but it was Edward II's wife, Isabella of France, who arranged the marriage. But then when Edward III actually assumed authority, he didn't like the idea and he wanted the other candidate for the Scottish throne, Edward Balliol, on the throne. So he caused real problems for his sister, really, to be honest, because it must have been really hard for Joan. Her brother and husband are fighting. Literally, Edward even captures David II at one stage. So, but that's the only one where the diplomatic ties weren't made closer by the marriage. I mean, because the other Joan who married into Scotland, Henry III's sister, she kept the links, and then Henry III's daughter Margaret married Alexander III of Scotland, and they had, between Joan and Margaret, there was something like 76 years of peace between England and Scotland. Practically the whole of the 13th century was peaceful. When I mean, the English and the Scots are as bad as each other when it comes to invading.
No, I think the Scots are worse. As a Yorkshireman,
yeah. Especially up around Byland Abbey, yeah.
Exactly. So. Very close to me. I was going to say the eight. Sorry, go ahead.
Of course, the Scots, as far as they're concerned, Northumberland belongs to them. So,
well, actually, Edinburgh belongs to Northumberland. If we're going back to Anglo-Saxon times.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we go back far enough. Yeah.
So the age of these princesses seems quite important, because from what I remember of research, we have an idea of kind of medieval people getting married in their early teens, which is not true at all. Like most medieval women or men often get married in their early 20s, but this is not the case, I think, for princesses. What age would princesses typically be married off?
You're right. It's definitely not the age for princesses. Empress Matilda was sent to Germany when she was 8. Henry II's daughter Joanna was 11, I think. Yeah, 11. Joanna's sister Matilda was 8. But they're not sent to be married.
I was going to say, what's the sort of what's the expectation, and what's the age? Obviously there was nothing like the age of consent, but there still was.
There were
talk
rules
about consummation of marriages and stuff. So what was the deal there? I mean, that's kind of gross, but
the church rule was that girls could not be married until the age of 12, and for boys it was 14. You guys always mature later than us, remember?
That's very
true.
Empress Matilda married a month before her 12th birthday. Now, there's also the fact that they're not expected, even then, to consummate the marriage. Not until they're 15 or 16 would they be expected to consummate the marriage. But the idea is you send them there early so they can acclimatise.
So learn the language.
I was going to say, you learn a language. I mean, I moved to Spain when I was 13, and you pick up a language when you're a child a lot quicker than you do as an adult,
and make friends and connections as well. I mean, when I was reading up on Empress Matilda, one of the first things she did at the age of 8 when she arrived in Germany was intercede for a chap named Godfrey of Louvain, who we don't know what he'd done, but he'd upset the emperor. So she interceded with the emperor. His daughter was about the same age as Empress Matilda, and her name was Adeliza of Louvain, and she would eventually become the wife of her father, Henry I. So it's like, you suddenly got this idea. Actually, Matilda would have known Adeliza, and they may have been educated together, grown up together from the age of 8. And she may even have recommended Adeliza to her dad. She may say, "Oh, you're looking for a new wife, Dad. Adeliza would be perfect for you.
Yeah, she's lovely. She's great. Yeah, I get on with her.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. So they're making these connections all the time while they're growing up. I mean, even Joanna, who was 11 when she arrived in Sicily, so she was about the right age to marry, and she had the wedding day and her coronation on the same day. But then she was allowed to grow up a bit more. You know, her time then was spent studying, learning the language, learning about the politics of the country. They were supposed to be useful. They weren't jewels to adorn a king. They had a job to do.
Yeah.
And in order to do that job, they had to be educated. You know, they had to know the ins and outs of court life, who they could trust, who they couldn't trust, what the factions were in different parts of the court and things. So they did have to learn about their new homeland.
Mm. So there's some fabulous names that you've mentioned. Joanna of the Tower seems fabulously Arthurian. Do you have a favorite
Guess where she was born?
Tower of London?
Yep.
I was going to say, I'm reading Bernard Cornwell's, Bernard Cornwell's Winter King trilogy, so I'm thinking more of Glastonbury or somewhere. But do you have a favorite princess?
Sorry, but Joanna of the Tower, her name after she got married was Joanna Makepeace.
Okay.
Because it was a relation in Scotland to make peace. Yeah. But a favourite one. Oh, there are so many. There are some brilliant, you know, there's some. I think it would have to be Henry II's daughter, Joanna, who she married William II, King of Sicily. And in 10 years of marriage, they didn't have any children, unfortunately. And she was just widowed in 1191 when Richard the Lionheart went on crusade, stopped off in Sicily. She'd just been widowed and then imprisoned by the chap who wanted the throne, Tancred. So Richard the Lionheart stopped off, rescued her, stole her dowry. And then took her with him to Jerusalem, to the Holy Land, tried to marry her to Saladin. And she was like, no, I'm not having any of that.
He was a bit of a douche, was Richard III, wasn't he?
Yeah, but she was a companion of his wife Berengaria while they were there. And then when she came back, she was escorted through Toulouse to Aquitaine by Raymond, the future Count of Toulouse. But then spent time with her mum and with Berengaria before she was married to the chap who'd escorted her through Toulouse, Raymond, and then left him because he was a bit of a git. He had this habit of, nobody can work out exactly how many wives he's had, because he had this habit of marrying somebody while he was still married to the previous wife.
She sounds almost like a kind of royal version of the wife of Bath.
She was brilliant, Joanna, and it's just she died just a few months after Richard the Lionheart as well, so it was a tragic end because she was pregnant. She'd been involved in a fire at her camp while she was besieging a castle, and she was injured and either gave birth and died, or died and there was a cesarean. Sources differ. And she was buried at Fontevraud. But she just had such an adventurous life, and it wasn't always her own choices. But she certainly lived.
Yeah.
Yeah. You talk in the book, there's a few mentions of marriages that don't actually happen, that you know, that there's political discussions. And I remember in my latest Hunlaf book, there's a rumor in the historical notes, I remember we talked about on the podcast, on your podcast, there was a sort of a rumor that Charlemagne was going to marry the Empress Irene of Constantinople at one point, which didn't ever happen. So can you talk a little bit about some of those sort of near misses, those near weddings that didn't happen, and you know, talk about that a bit? Do you remember any of those from the book?
Well, I think the best one is probably John's daughter, Joanna of England, who married
Someone.
Alexander II of Scotland.
Well, that's very good.
That's correct. I just checked my notes and you are correct. Yeah.
Checking Wikipedia as we speak.
But yeah, she was originally intended to marry Hugh the Tenth de Lusignan. And she was actually left in with the Lusignan family at the age of 4 to be raised by them, and then married to Hugh the Tenth. Hugh the Tenth was the son of Hugh the Ninth, who'd been originally betrothed to Joan's mother, Isabel d'Angoulême. But then John sort of stole her away and married her. It was a very good political move by John, because the Lusignans, if the Lusignans and Isabel d'Angoulême had been married, then they would have literally cut the Plantagenet possessions in France between Aquitaine and Gascony in half. You know, they'd have split it and they'd hold the land between the two. So John married Isabel, and that solved the problem. But then again, when John dies, Isabel doesn't have a place in the English court or the regency of her son Henry III, who's only 9. So she decides to go back home to Angoulême, ostensibly to arrange the marriage of her daughter, who's now 10 years old, to Hugh the Tenth de Lusignan. Except she decides that, well, Hugh the Tenth needs a wife who's a bit older, who can have children straight away. And she does write a lovely letter to her son Henry III explaining this, and basically explaining why she's stolen her daughter's betrothed and married him herself. Oh yeah, and then holds her hostage for Isabel's dower lands in England to be turned over to her. So yeah, I think that's the one for me. I think it's just like, poor Joan. I think she probably had a great escape with not marrying Hugh the Tenth anyway, because as it turned out, Isabel and Hugh's marriage was a bit of a rocky one. She threw him out of a fortress once and locked him out.
So you've written many books on this period, and of course you have the history, the Interesting Bits blog. I guess more than a decade old now. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's 11 years old this month.
Yeah, and so listeners who want to kind of get you on a regular basis can check that out. And how did blogging shape your voice and approach to as a historian and an author, do you think?
I think it was essential, to be honest. I was writing small articles on Facebook about medieval women in my Medieval Queens group. And I was enjoying it. And I've always done research and writing, but never seriously. And then my husband actually bought me the blog for Christmas, because he didn't know where to get me. He got me a blog. And at first I was like, okay, but he'd set it all up for me. I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do was write the articles. He'd got
what a fabulous gift.
Yeah, it was. It was there. It was ready. So I just started writing articles, and my first articles were something like 800 words long. It was like trying to get, blood out of a stone trying to write these articles. But I mean, now I don't blink at something like 2,500 words. It's like, oh yeah, that's all right then. But I look back at the early ones and it's like, these were really short articles. Yeah. But it honed my skill, it was finding my voice in writing and making sure I did it. I remember I wrote an article on the children of King Stephen, and somebody challenged me on something, on what I'd written. And I'd actually written down my sources. So when they said, oh, I didn't know that, I've never heard that, as if to say, you're lying, Sharon. And I went, actually, it's in this book on this page. And it got me to make sure that I was doing everything the right way, backing everything up, making sure I had 3 or 4 sources for every piece of information, so that I could say, even if I did get it wrong, I could say, this is where I got that from. And that's why I said it, and so it actually allowed me to hone my skills, but then it actually gave me confidence in how I was writing, in what I was writing, the information I was sharing, and also just the fact that I'm putting putting yourself out there. I mean, you guys know that the first time you write a book and somebody reads it and you're like, oh my God, what are they going to say? It's getting that confidence to actually put your book in front of somebody else. If I hadn't done the blog, I don't think I'd have ever written a book.
Yeah. That sounds like a great present then. So a great Christmas present.
Yeah, life-changing.
Yeah, life-changing, literally.
It was, because it was 2 years. It was Christmas 2014. So I wrote my first article in January 2015. And by 2016, I'd entered a writing competition with Amberley Publishing to get your first non-fiction book published. And I remember doing it thinking, I only sent it in a week before the deadline because I was like, no, I'm not going to do this. What if they say no? At the end, I was like, stuff it. If they say no, they say no, but at least you've tried. Because usually I hate rejection. So I was like, oh. And I did get a rejection letter back, but it was the best rejection letter ever. Because it was like, dear Sharon, you entered this competition. I'm afraid you haven't won. However, we would like to publish the book.
Oh, there you go. What more do you want? Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was Heroines of the Medieval World, and that came out in September 2017. So,
and did your husband come up with a name?
Of
History of the Interesting Bits. Yeah.
No, that was my name. That's a book I am still intending to write. It was my first book idea back 20, 30 years ago. I was going to write this book, History, the Interesting Bits.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
I never got around to it, but I think I probably will still write it at some stage.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that the first book was Heroines of the Medieval World. Was that the one that
was the one
that you and you've written several books now about medieval women and events, and from that, Silk and the Sword, as well, of course, this new one, or these new two. But how does Princesses of the Early Middle Ages, how does that fit into the broader picture and this project of telling women's histories? And if I could be so bold, I think it's a great niche that you found. It's obviously not that small a niche. It's a big niche of 50% of the population are women, but you seem to have really sort of found a great way, an entry point, into writing history. I think it's a brilliant idea, which I don't know if it's a conscious decision. Well, that's another question. Was it a conscious thing, or has it sort of just happened?
I fell into it, actually, because my dissertation at university was on the soldiers of the English soldiers, British soldiers in the Peninsular War.
Ah, so a fan of Sharp then, obviously.
Oh God, yeah. I was reading everything Bernard Colman was producing 2 books a year back then as well. So I was well into Sharp. And in fact, the dissertation's dedicated to Bernard Cornwell.
There you go.
So, but then when I started on Facebook and you saw all these groups for medieval kings, Edward IV here, Richard III there, and I was just sat there I was getting a bit feminist by that point. I'm sat there looking, where are the women? Nobody talks about the bloody women except Eleanor of Aquitaine. And that's it, nobody went any further. So it was like, when I started writing the blog, I started doing, the whole idea was originally to just do interesting articles on little snippets from medieval history, but then I found that my articles on medieval women were the ones that were getting the most interest, and the most discussion going. And I thought, okay, then I'll do that. And I admit, I'm like everybody else. I thought women's history was kittens and embroidery, and they didn't do anything, they just sat around looking pretty. Then you find out that these women actually, they did have lives. They weren't just appendages to the men. They were, just like husbands these days, they valued their wives and their daughters and the advice they would give. And, and it was just like, it was an eye-opener to me that these medieval women were so influential. But with little it was like discreet influence. It's not, they couldn't do these stand up and, tell people. They had to do it subtly. And the ones who tried to do it overtly, like Empress Matilda, were criticised for it. I mean, she got called haughty and everything, and she wasn't. She was just standing up for herself. You know, she was doing.
Sadly, that hasn't changed very much, has it? I mean, you got
No.
Things like the situation with Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris, in America, and basically getting told, oh, their voices is too shrill or whatever, or they laugh funny, or they're too noisy, or they're too whatever it is. It's almost like an insult to stand up and speak intelligently in front of people.
The best example for me was it was a sporting one actually, and it was one of the Williams sisters had just had a baby, and it was after Wimbledon, and they were interviewing her. She'd won Wimbledon, and how have you been doing this with the baby at home? And it was like, nobody asks any of the blokes about their family. Any of the male tennis players, they don't ask them. As soon as it's a woman and she's got a baby, it's like, oh, what? How have you managed to do this with a baby at home? It's like, you shouldn't be here. You've got a baby at home. It's like it's this one rule for the men and one rule for the women, and it's changing, but it's changing very slowly.
It's changing very slowly, yes, exactly, and probably not everywhere. Well, surely not everywhere in the world.
Yeah,
but this blog obviously was transformative for you. You had the blog, and then you ended up writing. And more recently, you've started doing the Slice of Medieval podcast with Derek Burks.
Yes.
That's only been, what, 2 or 3, 4 years, something? That's
3 years now.
So that's more recent. Yeah. But how has doing the podcast affected the way that how has it affected your work, the way you approach the writing, or has it at all, do you think?
I don't know if it has affected my writing. It's certainly, I enjoy it. And I think it's very much less isolating than it was beforehand, because I know I've always got, chatting with Derek on Thursday with a guest, and I'm like thinking, I've always got this to look forward to. And I'm getting to meet so many historians and authors like yourselves. You've both been on the podcast before. And I just find it interesting hearing other people's, like I know you guys do, hearing other people's journeys and what gets them up in the morning and how they do their research. And I just find it's just really refreshing. And then I go and do a talk somewhere and somebody goes, oh, I was listening to your podcast the other day. And it's like, oh, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's the best thing. I think I remember the last time we saw each other in person, was it at the Historical Novel Society conference?
It was HNS in 2020.
in Devon, yes. And I remember, when people come up, and because we quite using that term niche again, the podcasts, this podcast and your podcast, they're maybe a little bit niche, or ours maybe more than yours, I don't know, but it was quite exciting when a couple of people came up, or a few people came up during that event and said to me and Stephen at the time, said, oh, we listen to the podcast all the time, big fans of the podcast. You think, oh really, some people actually listen to this? It's a brilliant thing when you actually meet people in real life that actually are listening. And it's great validation. But in terms of what you were saying about the social aspect, we really find that. I think that's one of the biggest draws, really, for people in our profession. That we're sitting at home writing all the time, having some social interaction beyond social media. Actually face to face on, even if it's on Zoom, but it's still chat to other people, and you get to meet, as you say, so many interesting people.
Yeah, it is. And like you, we've had Bernard Cornwell on, which was my big thing, but we had Ian Mortimer, we've had on a couple of times now, and he's brilliant. He's just he just knows his stuff so well. It's just like you have to remember to ask him questions because you're sat there soaking it all in. And but I have as you know, I do have a good laugh on the podcast. I do get told off by Derek laughing too much because I get all giggly. But I'm meeting my heroes,
Well, yeah, I mean, the same here. We've met all sorts of great people, and as you say, Bernard Cornwell and many others. It is just great. So moving forward, obviously, I'm assuming you're carrying on with the podcast, and that's a going concern. And and you do talks, you said as well. So you got any talks you want to plug that are coming up this year?
I'm doing one at Wollerton Hall next week. Not Wollerton Hall, Wollerton, somewhere near Wollerton Hall in Nottinghamshire. I haven't got any, I don't think I've got any festivals set up yet. But for some reason, a lot of my talks come in about a month before I'm due to do them.
Oh, right. Okay. That's quite short notice then, yeah.
I've got a few schools lined up as well, because what is really great is schools are now incorporating women's history into their history curriculum. So I've got a couple of schools I'm going into in the next few weeks to talk about women and Magna Carta and the anarchy and the Norman Conquest and things like that. So
that's brilliant. Great. So for the public speaking events that you do, I guess they're on your website, or
where can people find? There's an events page on my website, and I always put them up on there. With I think I'm doing Grantham Museum is the next big one, which is in March.
Okay, brilliant.
So yeah, all the information will be on there as soon as I have the ticket information.
Great. And so the second book of these princesses books, when's that coming out?
I think that's out in June. So yeah. So I'm actually going through the final edits now of this one, and then I'm guessing that I'll be getting the next one to edit next week or the week after, probably.
And have you got plans for what you'll be writing after that? Is that something that's already
happening? I'm 29,000 words in, and that's due in May, I hope.
All right.
I know it's a month that begins with M, so I'm hoping it's May rather than March.
So 2 questions for that then. So one, are you allowed to say what it is?
I am. Yeah, it's medieval rebel women.
Medieval rebel women. Okay, sounds good. That's very, very right up your street, I think. Rebel women.
Yeah, and the publishers came up with the subtitle, and the subtitle is "Not bad, not mad, sometimes bad and dangerous to know."
Fair enough. And the other thing, I was just 29,000 words in. How long is one of these non-fiction books? How long do they tend to be in terms of words count?
They're supposed to be 100,000 words, including notes and bibliography, and they're usually 100,000 words excluding notes and bibliography, because apparently I write just like I talk too much.
Well, I don't think that our listeners would agree with that. I'm sure everybody's very pleased to hear you talk, and it's great to have a guest on that knows their stuff, and you clearly know your stuff, Sharon. And it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. As always, I'm sure we'll have you on again sometime in the future, and always a pleasure talking to you. So thanks ever so much.
How about when Medieval Rebel Women is coming out? Because I really love doing that. Did you know how many rebel women are in Brittany?
So is Brittany the place for rebel women then?
Brittany breeds rebel women. It's brilliant.
That could be
something in the water there.
That could be your new subtitle. Brittany breeds rebel women. It's like a tongue twister. Anyway, thanks ever so much for coming on. It's been
thank you, Sharon.
Thank you both. I've really enjoyed it.
Okay. That was fabulous.
Well, that was great. Yeah. Really good.
She's always good, and it's lovely to be back on kind of home turf of the 1066 period.
Yes. You clearly know sort of details of some of the names and the events around there more clearly than I do. I was thinking about some of the queens and the princesses in the books in Bane of Benicia at the moment. So you've got Arnflad and Oswy. Obviously, this is the 7th century, so this is back. But even then, it's very similar in that you've got Oswy marrying off his daughter to Penda's son, so Penda of Mercia, and then Penda's got a son that he marries to. They've got they've got 2 children each that are marrying to 2 of Oswy's children. They're trying to do all this sort of building bridges between the 2 kingdoms. It doesn't seem to last very long, and they end up sort of having another battle about a year later. So I don't really know what's going on there.
But siblings alike.
Yeah, no, these are the fathers. So the fathers obviously trying to build some sort of dynasty between
Yeah,
them.
that's a
sort of
serious dynasty, isn't it?
marrying their children off together, but within a couple of years they're at loggerheads again and fighting. So it's difficult to know from a writer's perspective what the hell's going on because there's so little detail there. But yeah, really interesting. Talking to someone who obviously she really knows her stuff. She's found this part of history that she's really, enthused by. Yes, and it's really interesting because obviously telling the story of women through, throughout history, and of course in the early medieval where there's very little written about them. So it's a really very interesting topic and a topic that's full of ripe for tapping into, I think. So
yeah, definitely worth a read.
Yeah, really good. So I think that's it from us, isn't it? Got anything else to say?
I don't think so.
Apart from goodbye.
Yeah, well, we have some thanks.
Yeah, well, thanks everybody for listening to the podcast, and we hope you've enjoyed it as much as we've enjoyed recording it. Don't forget to leave a review and subscribe wherever you listen or watch this podcast. And thanks, of course, to all of our wonderful patrons, and a special shout out to our Patreon producers, Ben Mayer, Andy Maxwell, Ben Fox, George Johnson, and Matt Muller, and Justin. Maybe a special announcement as well. Special thanks.
And for the very first time, our very first legend, Adam Turner. Thank you very much.
Yeah, legendary.
You can sign up for
legendary sign up on Patreon.
You can sign up on Patreon, support us from as little as £1 a month, and don't forget there are now new tiers with even more rewards. You too could be a legend.
Yes, you too could be a legend. This is it, including VIP status, yes, and all these sort of things. So until next time, on Rock, Paper, Swords, it's goodbye from me, Matthew Harffy.
It's goodbye from me, Justin Hill.
And remember, whatever action and adventure you have going on in your life, be kind.
Stay safe.
And happy reading.